The story of the Chevy 305 doesn't begin with an engine, it begins with a crisis. Picture the late 1970s. America is lined up at gas stations, engines idling, tempers rising, oil prices are exploding, the government is cracking down on emissions. Muscle cars, once loud, proud, and hungry, are suddenly too expensive to feed and too dirty to pass new regulations. And inside Detroit's boardrooms, the pressure is boiling over. Because GM knows one thing: if they don't adapt, they die. But most people have no idea that the engine created to save Chevy would become the one enthusiasts love to blame. You think you know the 305? Not like this. What almost nobody realizes is that the Chevy 305 wasn't built to be legendary. It was built to survive, and the decision that created it changed American engines for decades. But before the 305 became Detroit's punching bag, it had to face a challenge no V8 ever wanted. It had to be powerful enough for the American driver, yet small enough to meet government rules that were tightening by the month. So let's go back to the moment the mission was given. It's 1976, inside GM's Chevrolet Engineering Center. Engineers sit around a long table, stacks of emissions papers everywhere. Someone slams a fist on the chart showing fuel economy targets. Another points to the EPA's upcoming standards. The room is tense, very tense. An engineer reportedly says, "The 350 won't pass, not without killing power." Another fires back, then shrink it, but keep the torque. Americans want drive 4 cylinders, and there it is. The mandate that would create the most controversial V8 of its era. Chevy needed displacement. Without the displacement, they needed a smaller bore, better emissions behavior, cleaner burn, higher efficiency. Something that could still work across big platforms like the Monte Carlo, Caprice, and Camaro. Their solution: a downsized small block, a 3.736-inch bore, a 3.48-inch stroke, 305 cubic inches, 5 liters on the dot. That decision would define an entire decade. But before we judge the 305, you have to understand why that bore mattered. Chevy didn't choose it randomly. A smaller bore increases flame efficiency. It reduces unburned hydrocarbons. It concentrates the combustion chamber. And most importantly, it helps pass emissions with less spark knock. Exactly what GM needed. But there was a trade-off. A huge one. High RPM breathing becomes harder with a small bore. Valve size is limited, airflow hits a ceiling, and if you want big horsepower, forget it, you're boxed in. And this is the conflict that follows the 305 forever. It was engineered for survival, not domination. Yet in the late 70s, that compromise didn't look like failure. It looked like salvation. The early 300 and 5 seconds ran modest compression ratios, around 8.51. Power wasn't impressive, but in 1977, nothing was. With about 145 to 160 horsepower and around 245 lb-ft of torque, the 305 could move a big sedan without embarrassing itself. More importantly, it passed emissions. For a brief moment, GM breathed, crisis managed, but then came the 80s. And suddenly the 305 was everywhere. Camaro, Firebird, Monte Carlo SS, El Camino, Caprice, trucks, vans, fleet cars, police cars. If it had a bow tie badge, chances are you could get it with a 305. And that's when the real problem appeared. Because when you put an engine designed for efficiency into cars that promise speed, you create disappointment. And disappointment in car culture becomes legend. But the truth gets even crazier. Most people don't realize the 305 actually had potential. Underneath the reputation, there were versions that quietly pushed boundaries. Take the 1983 to 1987L 69 high output 305, a 9.51 compression ratio, a hotter cam, quadrajet carb, a true dual-plane intake, 190 horsepower and 240 lb-ft of torque. Not bad at all for the era. In a Monte Carlo SS, it ran the quarter mile in the mid-15s. Not earth-shattering, but enough to feel alive. Then came the LB9 Tuneport Injection 305 in the Camaro and Firebird. Long-tuned runners, more velocity, more low-end torque. It made around 215 horsepower and up to 275 lb for it, and that torque? That's what made third-gen Camaros feel quicker than the numbers suggested. But there was a problem, a big one. People didn't compare the 305 to its peers. They compared it to the engines of the 1960s, the golden age, the legends. Engines like the 327, the screaming 302Z, 28, the bulletproof 350 LT1. Compared to those, the 305 didn't stand a chance. And then, the nightmare hit. Because emissions rules kept tightening, GM had to tune the 305 even more conservatively. The heads had swirl port chambers, great for fuel burn, terrible for airflow. Valves were small, typically 1.8 4-inch intake, 1.5 thousand 0-inch exhaust. Camshafts were mild, red lines were low, and the engine simply couldn't breathe. And when an engine can't breathe, you can't make power no matter how much tuning magic you try to sprinkle on top. Mechanics in the 80 seconds would open up 305 heads, look at the ports, and joke, you could plug these with a golf ball. But airflow wasn't the only issue. There was also the piston problem. Early 305 seconds used a soft aluminum piston design that didn't love detonation. When drivers ran cheap gas, towing heavy loads, or ignored spark knock, pistons would crack. Not always, but often enough to give the engine a reputation. Then there was the infamous 305 cam lobe wear, flattened lobes, tapping lifters, metal in the oil pan. A retired GM mechanic once said, "We replaced more 305 cams in the 80s than spark plugs." He wasn't wrong. But the craziest part? None of these issues were unique to the 305. The Ford 302 had cam wear problems. The Chrysler 318 had its own emissions-era struggles. Yet somehow, the 305 became the target. The symbol of everything enthusiasts hated. Why? Because it was the engine stuffed into cars people wished were fast. Imagine buying a brand new Camaro Z28 in 1982. It looks incredible. Wide stance, bold lines, big hood, aggressive spoiler. It screams performance. But under the hood, a 145 horsepower 305. You can probably guess how that felt. The press roasted it, owners complained, and enthusiasts blamed the engine, not the era. And then came the worst hit of all. The 305 wasn't modular like modern engines. You couldn't take it to 400 horsepower cheaply. The bore was too small for big valves. The heads hit their limit early, and the block simply wasn't meant for high RPM punishment, so builders ignored it. Restorers replaced it, and hot rodders pulled it out. The 305 became the forgotten child of the small block family. But here's the twist most people never hear. The 305 didn't fail. It succeeded at the job it was built for. It kept full-size cars alive during an era when V8s were being hunted by regulations. It delivered fuel economy in the 20-plus mpg range, when most engines struggled to hit 15. It ran smoothly, quietly, and reliably if maintained. And it gave American buyers something they desperately wanted, a V8 that wouldn't bankrupt them at the pump. By 1986, over 1,305 seconds had already hit the road. By the early 90s, several million. It was everywhere. In police cars, taxis, fleets, family sedans, performance coupes, And that ubiquity is why the legend formed. When something is everywhere, so are its flaws. But still, the question remains, how did it become the most blamed engine of the 1980s? The answer is simple. Expectations. People wanted muscle. The decade didn't allow it. And the 305 was caught in the crossfire. It wasn't a bad engine. It was an engine forced to live in a bad moment. But let's fast forward to the turning point. GM releases the new LT1 350. More power, more airflow, more everything. Suddenly, the 305 is obsolete overnight. Production winds down, tooling fades, and by the mid-90s, it's gone. The 305 dies quietly, no farewell, no celebration, just replaced. Yet its legacy is far more interesting than people admit, because the 305 taught GM hard lessons about airflow, emissions, and efficiency. It pushed them to develop better head designs, better combustion chambers, better fuel control, better computer management. The technology that later created the legendary LS engines, some of its DNA traces back to 305-era engineering. Funny how history works. Today, the Chevy 305 lives with a strange reputation. Some people hate it, some people defend it, and some people simply shrug and say it's fine. But when you step back and look at the era, the regulations, the challenges, and the compromises, one thing becomes clear. The Chevy 305 wasn't Detroit's worst engine. It was Detroit's scapegoat. It took all the criticism for an era defined by restrictions. It carried the weight of expectations it could never meet. It became the symbol of disappointment, even when it didn't deserve it. And maybe that's why people still talk about it today. Not because it was incredible, not because it was awful, but because it was the engine caught between two worlds, the muscle car past and the efficient future. So here's the truth most people never hear. The 305 did exactly what it was designed to do. It kept American V8s alive when everything was trying to kill them. It bridged the gap between carburetors and computer control, and it became the engine that took the punishment, so the legends after it didn't have to. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments what engine, rivalry, or piece of forgotten automotive history you want next. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the machines that shaped America's roads and the myths that still follow them.